Hello everyone. Happy Friday and welcome to HR for Small Business, episode number 14 this week. How are you? I hope you've had a wonderful week and are having an amazing Friday. And I want to know whether you're like me and are looking forward to a long weekend, which many of us have this weekend. Despite it being freezing where I am, which I'm not enjoying at all, I am looking forward to a long weekend, and I hope you are as well if you get to enjoy a long weekend this weekend as well. And I hope you've had a great week, whatever you're up to. Now, thanks for joining me here today on episode number 14 of HR for Small Business. Today, we are talking about possibly one of the most challenging things we face as business owners, and that's when we become frustrated with one of our employees. Now, before I get into that today, I just want to let you know we are going live using an app called StreamYard, and if you are joining us from our Facebook group, HR from Australian Businesses, which I do hope you are. And if you're not already part of that community, please go ahead and join us on Facebook. But you will just need to give StreamYard permission to use your name should you wish to join in the conversation, make a comment, or ask a question. And if you do have any questions at all throughout today's session of HR for Small Business, please ask away in the chat. It is there for you, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that you have. Or if you'd just like to contribute to the conversation and make some comments about what we're talking about, please join in. I would love to hear from you. Now, as mentioned today, we are talking about what to do when you're frustrated with an employee, and in fact, how to figure out why you might be frustrated with them. I've been working with small businesses on all aspects of their HR for over a decade now, and I can tell you this, being frustrated with an employee is kind of normal. I can't name a business that I've worked with that hasn't at some point come to me with a challenge about being frustrated with one of their team members. So if you also have frustrations from time to time with one of your team, I do want you to know that you're not alone. It is very, very common. And it can be something that really eats away at business owners, is what I've seen over the last decade or so. Don't know whether this sounds familiar to you, but perhaps you've been up at night kind of stressing about this employee, not sure what to do, not sure what's going on. Why aren't they doing what I'm asking? Maybe you've even sort of cringed when you've had to deal with them and had that actual visceral reaction to dealing with them. Maybe it's snowballed and you started being frustrated with something little that they did, but now you're suddenly frustrated with everything about them, and you can't quite put your finger on why it's gone that far. And the likelihood is it's gone that far because you haven't dealt with the initial frustration, or you haven't been clear about what the initial frustration was. Now, for those of you who I haven't met before, hi there, my name is Kristy-Lee. I am a HR practitioner. I'm the founder and director of a HR consulting practice known as the Footprint Group. I'm the CEO of People Powered HR, which is an online HR community for small businesses who employ staff but aren't large enough to want or need an internal HR manager. So generally 5 to 50 staff. Business owners are members of our People Powered HR community. I'm the host of the People Powered Business podcast, and I also co-host the Grow Your Influence podcast with leadership expert Juliette Robinson. So I've seen a thing or two in my time about dealing with frustrated employees, and I wanted to share with you today on today's episode of HR for Small Business a few things around this that might help you unlock some things if you are feeling frustrated by one of your employees. So today we're going to talk about what are the fundamentals as to why we become frustrated with our employees. We're going to talk about expectation setting and what that looks like, and we're going to do a little check-in of our expectations. And finally, I'm going to share with you 3 of the most common reasons you might be frustrated with your employee. And I'm also going to share with you how you can get your hands on a free resource that I have available that's going to help you go a little deeper on this particular topic. So let's firstly look at the foundation. Why is it that we become frustrated with one of our team members? At the very core of things, we become frustrated with one of our team members because either there is a performance or a behavioral based issue. So either their performance isn't where we want it to be or what we expect it to be, or their behaviors and the way they're acting and speaking and communicating and carrying themselves at work is not up to what we expect and want and desire from them. That is the foundation. Every frustration you have with one of your people will come down to the fact that there is either a performance or behavioral issue that isn't matching up with what you expect from them. So right now, if you think about an issue that you've had with one of your people, a frustration that you've had, something that's just been getting under your skin, can you pinpoint, is it performance-based or is it behavioral-based? And it is always one of those two things. And in fact, I think for most of us, we can pinpoint the performance-based stuff really easily. We can put our finger on it, we can articulate it. It's the behavioral ones that are a little trickier. Sometimes we question ourselves, am I overreacting here? Is this me that's taking issue to this, and is it not that big a deal? Sometimes it's just the way they conduct themselves that kind of just doesn't gel with us. So it's not something specific that you can put your finger on immediately. And it's often a little harder for us to articulate when it comes to a behavioral-based issue, because sometimes we're not clear on what the issue is with the behavior ourselves. And it's so often the behavioral-based frustrations that I see snowball down into that longer-term issue that I mentioned at the beginning of today's session. So the first thing we want to think about is, are we dealing with a performance issue or are we dealing with a behavior issue? Because if you're frustrated with one of your people, it is always one of those things. And of course, it could absolutely be a combination of both. So that's important to understand at the foundation. Now I want to move on to expectations, because this is a goodie. There's a song from the early 90s by a band called the Gin Blossoms, which I was quite a fan of. It's called Hey Jealousy. You'll probably have it in your head for the rest of your day now. There's a line in that song that says something along the lines of, if you don't expect too much from me, you might not be let down. And I'm always reminded of that song when I'm talking to business owners about expectations. Now, there's a few things that I want to talk to you about when it comes to expectations. And one of them is, are your expectations realistic and reasonable for the person in the role? Because sometimes as business owners, we forget that actually our team members aren't clones of us. Our team members aren't entrepreneurial. They don't think like us. And therefore, they're not going to perform and behave in the same way we do. So it's very important to just check that your expectations are on point for the role and the experience and the person that you're dealing with. Because expecting them to act like us, think like us, be like us, do things as quickly as us is actually a little unfair and is only setting them up for failure. And really, to get clear on that, what you need to do first is to be able to clearly articulate your expectations, right? Because if you're not clear about what your expectations are, you've got no way of checking whether they're reasonable and realistic for the role at hand. So when it comes to expectations, get clear on what it is you do expect from this person in this role. That comes down to performance-based expectations and also behavioral-based expectations. How am I expecting my people to behave at work? Because if you're not clear about that, there's no chance your employee is clear about that. So get clear on it, make sure it's realistic, and importantly, make sure you have communicated that expectation to your employee. Communicating clearly what your expectations are is not mean, it's not micromanaging, it's not being a hard boss, it's actually what your employees want. Your people fundamentally want to know what you expect from them and how they're going against those expectations. So if you haven't clearly articulated your expectations, then you're actually doing your employee a disservice. So get clear on your expectations, make sure they're reasonable for the role at hand, and make sure you have clearly articulated them to your employee, and importantly, your employee has actually understood them. And that might mean some checking and some getting them to feed back to you exactly what they've understood that to be, but make sure it's clear. Now, this is where things like position descriptions and KPIs are your best friend, because they specifically give that intel to the employee. Now, assuming that you're very clear on your expectations are right for the role, and you've clearly articulated them to the employee, what about if you're still having frustration issues? And most often, you will be clear about those things and you will have articulated them and you're frustrated with one of your employees. Well, what I found working with businesses for the last 10 plus years is that when you break it down, there's usually 3 fundamental reasons that you become frustrated with an employee. Now, on the surface, of course, there's a million reasons and they show up in different ways. The symptoms might be slightly different, but when you dig a little deeper and you really investigate the core root of the problem, there really are 3 key reasons you're going to become frustrated with an employee. The first reason is that the skills aren't there. They don't have the skills to perform the role, or they don't have the skills to perform the role anymore. As in, they need further training. Technology has moved forward and they aren't up to the speed with that skill set yet. Things have changed. So the first reason you're going to get frustrated is due to a skills gap. The employee is not exhibiting the skills you need for the role today. Now, that can happen for a number of reasons. One, what they said they could do at interview is not what it turns out they can do. They've outgrown the role's outgrown them. They haven't been trained on the new technology or the new process or the new system. It can actually show up in a number of different ways, not just at the early interview stage. So a skills gap is the first reason you might be frustrated with an employee. The second reason is that their motivation is missing in action. Now, for me, this is one of the most frustrating type of employees to deal with. And the reason being is you know how capable they are and you know how good they are at their job when they're switched on, when they're present, and when they're motivated. And when that motivation goes missing in action, it's super frustrating because you've kind of got to drag them kicking and screaming to do just the basics. They kind of turn up and go through the motions, but that is it. They're certainly showing no initiative and they're not going above and beyond. And even to get the basics done is hard work on your part. And it's frustrating because no one likes micromanaging people. No one wants to be constantly chasing just to get the day's work done. And it's what we end up doing when we've got a motivation issue on our hands. So that is definitely one of the key points of frustration. And the final reason that you might be frustrated with an employee is that you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And this happens when the values and the cultural fit are worlds apart. So you've got a particular value set and the culture of your business is built around that, and the employee just doesn't share the same values and they don't fit in with the team. And sometimes you hold on to these people because they're technically brilliant and finding people is really hard right now, and they've got all the skills and the skills are hard to find, and there's a million reasons we hold on to these people. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, it just never works out very well, does it? So when you think about situations where you may have been frustrated with an employee and you know your expectations are on point and you've been clear and you've communicated them, have a think about which one of these three core reasons might be at play. Do you have a skills gap on your hands? Is there motivation missing in action, or are you trying to put a square peg in a round hole? Sure, it could be a combination of a couple of them, but I bet you could identify at least one of those things. So to recap what we've chatted about today, we're talking about frustrations with our employees and why we become frustrated with one of our team members. We've spoken about the fact that all frustrations boil down to either a performance or a behavioural-based misalignment. Things aren't happening as we want them to, as we expect them to. We've talked about the importance about being clear about your expectations, about making sure your expectations are on point for that role and that individual in the role, and about clearly articulating your expectations to your employee. And then we spoke about what would be the case if after all of that you're still getting frustrated, which in most cases you've done all of that and you're still getting frustrated. It comes down to you've got a skills gap, their motivation is missing in action, or you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Now, at the beginning of today's episode, I shared with you that I have a resource available to you that's going to help you further identify which one of these problems you might have on your hands. I'm going to grab the link and put it straight into the comments here. Now, if you are watching us on our Facebook group, this won't show straight away, but I will post it in straight after we finish this video for you today. Now, the guide that I'm going to give you access to, is it me or is it them? How to deal with any problem employee without opening a can of worms, even if you hate confrontation, helps you identify in a little more detail which one of these problems you're dealing with. Is it a skills gap? Is it a motivation issue? Is it a cultural issue? And more importantly, the guide actually gives you the specific solution as to what to do with this employee once you've actually identified what type of problem you have on your hands. The guide is free. If you click on the link, you'll be able to just grab that straight away, and I'll make sure it's posted under the video for you if you're not able to see that, which you won't if you're joining us inside the Facebook group. I'll do that for you shortly. So that is a wrap for episode number 14 of HR for Small Business. I hope it's been a useful discussion for you. And I hope you find the guide that I've shared with you really useful in helping you identify what sort of problem employee you're dealing with, why you've become frustrated with them, and importantly, the solution that you need to put in place to help fix the issue. Now, I'll be back again next week for another episode of How to HR. But in the meantime, if you've got any questions, any comments, or if you're catching the replay, pop a comment in chat and I would love to hear from you. Have a fabulous weekend and I'll see you again next week.